People who divorced and separated within 1 year of getting married, when did you know it was a mistake? Story 1. I knew a week after I got married when he got violent with me because he saw me looking at a man at an ice cream shop. I'm from the US and got married in England. This dude changed completely right after we got married. A couple of weeks later, I had to get out of there and come back to the US. Story 2. Not me, but my dad. He got remarried after being divorced for about 5 years. I would have all been for it, but he met this woman in another state on a business trip. I would travel up to see her every weekend after they hit it off. They knew each other for 6 months before getting engaged. The engagement was only for 3 months. My brother and I tried telling him about all the red flags and telling him to take his time. My dad is very well off financially, and we kept trying to tell him things were moving too quickly, and she was only in it for the money. She moved her whole family from their hometown to the city my dad lived in, including their elderly grandmother who needed constant medical supervision. Before they were even married, the pantry was full of Whole Foods brand food instead of the local grocery store, as was tradition, all new furniture, and the house repainted at all his brides-to-be's request. The marriage lasted all of 2 weeks. Apparently, my new dad's bride had the gall to ask my dad to leave everything to her in the will and write me and my brother out. Only then did he realize she was in it for the money. The next day, he had the marriage annulled. Someday, I would like to know what it's like to fall so completely for someone that I don't recognize they're taking advantage of me. Must feel good for that instant before it all comes crashing down. Story 3. Back in the early 1980s, I spent 6 years in the U.S. Navy. In 1986, I was recruited to go into the U.S. Army through a program for technical and intelligence experienced military personnel to become warrant officers. All the Navy offered me was sea duty and more sea duty. It looked like a really good deal. I was engaged to a young lady 3 years my junior and had a bit more than $20,000 in savings. Everything looked promising with a new career and family life. The wedding went off without a hitch. I was looking at a vacation of about 3 months between exiting the Navy and entering training for the Army. It was when my recruiter contacted me over my security clearance that things went south. My credit report did not match my questionnaire. There were 3 credit cards with a $14,000 balance I didn't mention. It was no big deal. They weren't delinquent, but I needed to amend my answers to account for them. Turns out my wife had opened up a charge card at our bank, then got a couple of store cards around town. She had purchased some serious clothes and jewelry, but the real kicker was she had bought a horse. She had taken lessons as a child and decided this was going to be her new thing. There was the price of the animal, riding gear, saddle and tack, vet bills, stable fees, yada 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 yada. I ended up dumping a big chunk of my savings into paying down these cards, then amending my questionnaire responses. She was from a very blue-collar family. They were very good people who worked hard for everything they had. But I don't think credit ratings and compounded interest rates were much discussed at the dinner table. So I explained about credit cards, the huge interest rate, how long it would take to pay one down, then about the security clearances and having a huge debt with no job would affect it. I treated this as all a bump in our relationship, but things got dark really fast. My ship date was coming up and things had to be done before I started training. I was in good physical shape, but I was facing boot camp, AIT, airborne school, ranger school, warrant officer selection, and advanced training, basically 18 months of utter insanity. I was prepared for what I faced, but there was a lot that could go wrong. If I got through it, I was a warrant officer, but if I dropped the ball along the way, I would not only be enlisted, but junior enlisted in a job they would decide for me. In theory, I could end up a line cook in some chow hall at Camp Nowhere. About a week later, the phone rings. It's about the horse. No one was taking care of the animal or cleaning the stable or even feeding the poor thing. The stable had been covered down for the sake of the animal, but now we're charging $350 a week for the extra services my wife was supposed to be doing. She was leaving our apartment every day, and I assumed it was for riding and care of the animal, and for the first week she was. The second week, she was lawyer shopping. She wanted out. She must have gotten wind of what happened at the stable and didn't come home that night. The next day, I got served with papers. Total marriage time, 47 days. So I ended up with an apartment with 4 months on the lease, no car, and a horse. I found a new home for the horse. I had to defer my ship date, and it took 14 months to settle the divorce. My security clearance was approved 2 days after the papers were filed. I shipped the next day. In the end, I had 2 pairs of pants, 3 shirts, and a pair of shoes that had no business on anyone's feet. I was working 2 minimum wage jobs, 14 hours a day, paying down debt, lawyers' fees, rent, and sometimes eating to get by. I ended up at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, mowing lawns for 2 months as I shipped without a training slot for the boot camp. I wasn't happy, but I was relieved. In airborne school, I met an ROTC cadet who was going to airborne school over her summer break. She had a year to go before her commission, and we hit it off. We'd get together on holidays between training and long weekends. When I finished training and got my warrant, still a cadet, she flew across the country to give me my first salute. I gave her a silver dollar as per tradition, and 2 months later, she received her commission, to which I saluted her and returned the silver dollar. Married that Christmas. We've been together for 31 years. Story 4. She nearly killed me because she thought I was cheating from some text that went to my mother. Story 5. I was blindsided by it. We lived together for about a year, about an hour from my hometown. We relocated upon her request and desire to my hometown prior to our marriage so that when we had kids, it was best to be close to family. We had a house we loved, a dog we loved, and jobs we both loved working in, or so I thought. Married in October. She goes to visit her sister over the next Labor Day weekend and I can't attend due to work. Comes back the Tuesday after Labor Day and tells me she's living a lie and someone else's dream and she needs a divorce. I had no idea. Divorce finalized in January. She married some dude that her sister was friends with and she met on that trip. I was unable to attend this September. Life is wild sometimes. Story 6. When he said my son's suicide attempt interfered with his ex's birthday party. Story 7. Honeymoon. We dated for 5 years, but on the honeymoon, we had a big argument over my liberal use of sunscreen. She refused to wear any because of chemicals, and I liberally use it due to my ginger skin. We seriously argued over this for a good hour, and she refused to even go into the pool with me because of sunscreen chemicals. After a scuba adventure with her, she could hardly walk because she got so burnt on her legs, whereas my skin didn't change. She then tried to convince me that it was all my fault because I didn't force her to wear sunscreen and that the honeymoon was ruined. It was then I realized I picked the wrong person. After a few more psycho arguments, mad at me because of something in her dreams, mad because I didn't remind her to bring an umbrella, I had to call it quits. I can't stay with someone who constantly blames me for their own problems. Luckily, no kids, and I got back everything I brought into the marriage. Story 8. Not me, but my friend's sister. Her sister got engaged 8 months into her relationship and got married 4 months later. Everything went well for the first 5 months, but the husband started acting differently. He wasn't chatty, his good morning, good night kisses became dull, etc. Her sister would ask if everything was okay, and he would say, "I'm fine," every time. Her sister didn't want to push him, so she waited for him to talk about what was bothering him. One evening, after eating dinner, the husband said he wanted to talk about their relationship. Before he could talk about it, he started crying. He cried for a few minutes and then told her he was gay. The sister filed for divorce, and after the divorce was settled, she wasn't really mad at him anymore, so she went to see him and forgave him. They became good friends, and the sister helped him become comfortable with his sexuality. She even helped him come out to his close friends and then to his family. 5 years later, the sister was now engaged to another man, expecting their first child. The ex-husband is now very happily married to a man for almost a year now. Story 9. She went out for the girls' night and met a new friend named Nicole at a bar, started texting her a lot, then going to hang out now and then. We had a baby at home, and she kept trying to go hang out with this girl from another town with no last name whom I was not allowed to meet. His real name was Wesley. Story 10. I'd been fooling around with this girl for a while. I never wanted anything serious, and I knew that from the start. Then my mom was killed. I went into a deep depression, and this girl was there for me. Her mom had died of cancer about a year earlier, and I guess we really bonded over that. It pushed us much further emotionally than we ever should have gone. We ended up doing a courthouse marriage. I knew within the month that I had messed up, but I didn't want to just give up and get divorced. Once the emotions of my mom's death passed, I realized how toxic she really was. She was an incredibly unstable person and ended up just taking me into an even deeper depression. We divorced about a year ago after being married for about 10 months, and I was immediately much happier. Marriage shouldn't be taken lightly, but people also shouldn't force themselves to be in unhealthy relationships. We all make mistakes. Don't waste your life with someone that doesn't deserve you. Story 11. My sister got a civil marriage, then they moved super far away to the middle of nowhere because he got a good job. My sister never finished college, and he would remind her on a daily basis about it. She would get super depressed, and he wouldn't believe her. She got sick once, and he told her since she didn't go to the DMV that day, she wasn't allowed to go to a theme park we were planning on going to that weekend. He would demean her whenever she couldn't get a job or even an interview, and she applied practically everywhere within a 50-mile radius. He called her stupid in front of me, and when I called him out, he told me to mind my own business. If he wasn't twice my size, I would have decked him. She left him after about a year because he's obviously a raging ass. When she left, he told her she had nowhere to go, and if she went to stay with her mom, she would just be a burden like me. I was like 19 and in college at the time. He's rude, but at least she got the car and the dog. Story 12. The day after we got married, when he slapped me across the face, hard and completely out of the blue, no argument, no conversation leading up to it, nothing. He said it wasn't that hard of a hit, he was just kidding around and I was being over dramatic. He had never gotten violent with me while dating, but as soon as we got married, it was like a switch flipped and he was a completely different person. It got worse very quickly, and I ended up filing for divorce 73 days after we got married. Story 13. My mother-in-law got married for the first time when she was really young. Left him a month later. Turns out he was a raging alcoholic. She had no idea because her family was super overprotective and they were never really allowed to spend time together alone before they got married. Who knew spending time with someone could be the key to knowing if they're a good partner? Story 14. A cousin of mine married someone who seemed like the perfect woman. They worked in the same store together and he would brag about his life, was getting promoted quickly in the company. A few months into the marriage, she tells him she's going out with friends for the evening. An hour or so later, my cousin gets a call from one of his friends. The friend saw her having dinner in a restaurant with the manager of the store where they both worked. Once he confronted her about it, that was basically the end of the marriage. Story 15. A couple of weeks into our marriage, the sex started to physically hurt. I went to my OB and after a test or two, she informed me I had contracted chlamydia. That's when I knew. Turns out my newlywed husband had been banging his coworker for months. Story 16. Best girlfriend I had to date at the time. I was in my late 30s and had never been married. Dated for about a year. Got married shortly after she asked to have her name on all my assets, a few rental houses, my current house, and some financial instruments, the cars. Not a problem as we were married, I thought. But on a Wednesday, she insisted it is done by that Friday. I didn't have time to do that because of work and a deadline. I could start it the next week, I said. She pitched a fit and said if I loved her, I would do it by Friday. I found this strange and decided not to start it and see what happened. She moved out of our bedroom into a guest room, got cold around the house, and told me she would move back into our bedroom when I finished getting everything done. At this point, I thought, crap, and told her so. I went to the family lawyer to seek advice. She advised me not to put anything in her name at this point, gave me the name of a marriage counselor. She didn't want to go to counseling. She continued to live in the guest room. I took my lawyer's advice and did nothing about the assets. The long and short of it was, after 1 year of marriage, when our anniversary, she told me I didn't have her in my heart, I thought to myself, this is crap. About a week after that, I told her if this was okay, this is the way it's going to be. I'm not going to be married like this. She then told me, okay, so what are you going to give me? Yes, she actually said that. I consulted my lawyer on what a judge would come up with regarding community property for the past year. A number came up to 20G. I took that number and added about 20 grand and proposed that to her so we can make it easy. I was going to spend more than that in lawyer's fees if it got ugly, and it got ugly. A week later, I got servo papers with all said in the complaint. When added up, she was going after $750K after just 1 year of marriage. 1 year of divorce proceedings and 2 years of property settlement proceedings on what should have been a 2-hour problem. Judgment came, 215 points in the judgment. I owed her what would have been the community property, about 20 grand, but awarded me attorney's fees. So in net, she owed me about 30 grand and left her to go buy her own new car. Turns out this judge had worked her ass off through school to become a lawyer and the same to become a judge by 40 years old. I was told by another attorney that normally this judge never gives attorney's fees but was so pissed off at the gold dig my wife attempted that she felt it was justified in this case. Even though I came out okay financially, it was an emotional train wreck to have this happen and go through all of that. It's been 15 years since it happened. I was not dateable for about 2 years, but now I'm very happy with where I am and who I'm with. Story 17. Not me, but my dad. He got back from his honeymoon and went back to work. He came home and something felt off when he walked in the door. She wasn't there when he got home from work, which was very odd for her since she got off work earlier than him and was always home when he got back. When she did get back, he mentioned that it was out of the ordinary that she had been out and asked if she went somewhere. He wasn't accusatory, just curious because it never happened, but she dodged his questions at first. Eventually, after he got suspicious of her dodging a simple question, she admitted that she'd quit her job, and when he asked why, she said she didn't need to work, so she was planning on using him as her cash cow. He doesn't remember how the conversation went exactly since it was 30 years ago. He tried counseling and asked her to go get her job back, but she always brushed him off and never took him seriously. He threw in the towel 7 months later and she started trying to fix things, but it had been 7 months of him trying to fix things and she had no interest. So he filed for divorce and went on to achieve his lifelong dream. He dated and then married his middle school crush, my mom, 28 years strong. Story 18. I got married shortly after tech school, about 4 months later. We made plans for her to move from North Carolina to Texas to join me as I'm in the military and cannot move. 3 times I brought it up and 3 times she said she just needed more time to move. Finally, the 4th time, she said she couldn't leave her friends and family to move across the country to start our lives together. A year later, we were divorced, or, well, I divorced her. She obviously didn't come down to Texas for that and signed a waiver of citation to not get any news about it, so I basically got to, well, divorce myself, which, after hearing how vindictive ex-spouses can be, I chalk that up to a blessing. Story 19. When I caught my new bride having a workplace affair while I was receiving cancer treatments. It was not a pleasant time for me. This happened about 25 years ago. Yeah, I'm an older guy. It really sucked at the time. The day I found out I was a few months into both major surgery and then daily radiation treatment, I was down to about 118 from my normal 155 pounds. But as it turned out, it was a really good thing. We did not have a house or kids, and the divorce was rather simple. I went on to get married again and have 3 incredible kids I would never have had otherwise. The entire experience taught me a lot about the power of forgiveness. Admittedly, it took me too long to learn this lesson, and I have a pretty great life today. If you are currently going through something similar, please know that life can and does get better. We tried the whole marriage counseling thing after I caught her. The marriage counselor, however, was my wife's personal therapist. We had one meeting and the therapist asked to meet with me privately. She subsequently reported to my wife, Nika seems to have a lot of anger. You think? I had just lost over 20% of my body weight. I was still going through treatments and I found out my wife of less than a year was sleeping with a coworker? LOL. Story 20. Less than a year into actively trying to get pregnant, he got discouraged, gave up, and started saying out until 4:15 a.m. with his coworker. He posted selfies on her couch on Snapchat and even went as far as asking her to marry him once he could get rid of me. He had 2 biological children, my stepchildren, that he abandoned at home with me while he was out doing this. The icing on the cake was that on my favorite holiday, while holding my brand new baby nephew in front of his entire family, he told me he wanted a divorce. I was gone for 2 weeks, left everything to him, and vanished. New number, new address, everything. Best choice I ever made.